Mm. Mm. Okay, I think we'll get going. Are we in agreement? So, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Global Book Alliance Open Book Series on Girls in Education, Ensuring Books for Half the Sky, How to Get Girls More and Better Books. So thank you for joining us today for what will be an insightful and engaging discussion focused on the importance of how we get books into the hands of girls around the world. My name is Scott Walter. I'm the interim chair of the Global Book Alliance, as well as the executive director of Code, a Canadian nonprofit with a vision to support a literate world. Our mission at the Global Book Alliance is to transform the lives of millions of children in developing countries by working with public, private, and civil society partners to identify, promote, and support innovations, best practice, and policies that will change the way books are created, procured, and provided. I'm delighted to be joined today by GBA partners and colleagues from the publishing, public, and nonprofit world, all of whom are keenly engaged in supporting, advocating, and ensuring change so that more girls get access to the right books at the right level and in the right language for them. So why are we talking about girls and books again today? I say again, as hopefully some of you joined us in late May to hear from GBA partners from the UK, the US, Rwanda, and the World Bank to talk about why literacy and education matters so much for girls. We heard from the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education, Helen Grant, who detailed the UK's commitment to ensure that every girl gets at least 12 years of education to increase their ability to live fruitful lives, gain an education, and choose if, when, and how they start a family. We heard firsthand about the hard work being done in Rwanda from Dr. Uwa Maria, the Minister for Education, where ensuring girls are literate is part of not only Rwanda's Vision 2050, but a part of a national constitution that enshrines gender equality. The World Bank's Director of Education, Jaime Saavedra, explained their learning poverty indicators, worryingly showing that the learning crisis is growing, exacerbated by COVID-19 and by global recessions. And finally, colleagues Liana Marr from the USAID and Alicia Herbert from SCDO talked about what their respective agencies are doing to ensure that society, both its structures and its people, are set up to support girls as they learn to read and read to learn. We know that girls gaining literacy and education is a force multiplier, reducing infant girl mortality, ensuring better access to health, increasing the number of girls who go to and stay in school, and finally, increasing women's agency, leadership skills, and engagement. The global community made commitments at the G7 to support girls' education, but today we hope to hear more about how we can all help to make these commitments become concrete actions to cement change and ensure long-term impact. We'll talk about how we get books into the hands of girls, the right books that engender equity, show girls in all their power, and support their agency as they go forward in life. The GBA works to ensure these books and others are procured, written, published, distributed, and used, ensuring children, girls and boys, can access developmentally appropriate books in languages they speak and understand. Through our flagship initiatives, including the Global Digital Library, the National Book Supply Chain Analysis, the Begin with Books Award through the All Children Reading Grand Challenges, and support for publishers. The Global Book Alliance is working with partners to address the global shortage of high-quality children's books in underserved languages and to underserved populations. With focused work by collaborators, funders, partners, and supporters, we're all part of the Alliance aiming to increase literacy rates, to support a healthier book market, and ensure girls have access to books that pave the way for greater economic growth, health outcomes, democratic governance, and peaceful and resilient societies. So I'm truly delighted today to host this conversation with GBA partners and colleagues who are already paving the way. Just a reminder that we do plan to have a Q&A once we've heard from all our speakers. So do feel free to send in any questions during the event by clicking on the chat button and writing your question there. We likely won't be able to get to all of them, but we do promise to do our best. So on that note, delighted to welcome Bodour Al-Qasimi, the president of the International Publishers Association, as our keynote speaker. Bodour is truly a trailblazer in the global publishing scene. As the CEO and founder of Kalimat Publishing Group, she's been an avid advocate of the role of books and literacy to enlighten children and has led through her own Kalimat Foundation a number of campaigns to provide thousands of books for refugees and children affected by conflicts and hardship worldwide. In 2019, Bodour established Publish Her, a global networking body that seeks to increase the number of women in leadership roles within the publishing industry by giving them better access to key opportunities and in the process, promote equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the sector. Bodour holds a bachelor's degree in archaeology and anthropology from Cambridge University and a master's degree in medical anthropology from London's University College. Bodour, we are delighted that you've made time to be with us today, especially given the busy last few weeks I understand you've had at various book fairs around the world. We look forward to hearing more about the role of women in publishing and how that can help ensure more books get into the hands of girls. Bodour, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that kind introduction. I just want to say that you got me with the title of the seminar. I was very inspired, ensuring books for half the sky. It was such a beautiful topic to discuss today. And I just want to share with our viewers that it's not only that I'm professionally invested in this topic, but personally invested as well as a mother of three girls. You know, I always love to see young girls reading books that entice their imagination and really give them an opportunity to have a bright future. So thank you again for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. The choice of this topic really, I think, couldn't be more timely. As the world is navigating the different phases of the pandemic, we've seen disturbing reports emerge globally about how women, much like other minorities, have been affected by the pandemic, socially and financially. This is why today I believe that our discussion is timely and vital for the future of millions of girls around the world who need education to shield them from any of the market or economic volatility that we are facing right now. I just want to share some statistics with you to begin our discussion. 59% of the total illiterate youth population are girls. If we zoom in on one of the world's youngest continents, Africa, World Bank data shows that only 74% of young women in sub Saharan Africa are literate, which is the lowest rate in the world. And as African countries closed schools in response to the global pandemic, 250 million students transitioned to remote learning, which adds to the 100 million children who are already out of school. This is just one example. There are more in other parts of the world. And the story that shows that the numbers here are really scary when you see what is happening in pockets around the world. We all have a responsibility to address these imbalances. And the global publishing sector has been contributing to the solution through many initiatives around the world. One of our responsibilities as publishers is to ensure that the principles of diversity and inclusion are respected in terms of the books we publish, the voices we give a platform to, and the subjects that we focus on. I believe that this is relevant to our discussion because empowering girls starts by changing the dominating narrative, a narrative in which boys are bombarded with dinosaurs, race cars, and rockets, while girls are consigned to pink princesses and ponies. When women are portrayed as mothers or in administrative positions, books reinforce these dated social norms that women should stay at home or just take predominantly desk based work. It negatively affects girls' self esteem, forces them to follow a particular career path that's considered more suitable for women. I'm happy to say that we've seen some progress in this aspect. There's an effort now by publishers and authors to create more empowering and gender balanced narratives. There are also initiatives that have been created to address these issues from their root causes. For example, as a female publisher, I established Publish Her to address the stereotypes and practices that sustain such narratives by supporting women publishers advance in their careers. There's a strong presence of women in children and educational publishing right now, but when you look at the bigger picture, female publishers have been facing many challenges to become part of the decision making apparatus, which hasn't changed much for a long time, and it's been dominated by male colleagues. And through Publish Her, we've launched several initiatives to address these issues. For example, we created the first ever diagnostic toolkit to support publishing companies to become more diverse and inclusive. We launched a mentoring program to support young female publishers advance in their careers. And we conducted a series of interviews and conversations to highlight female publishers and their impact on the publishing industry. These interviews aim to inspire young women to join the publishing industry and encourage those that are already there to aspire for more. I'm happy to say that there are many countries in which diversity and inclusion in publishing are now taken very seriously, and the imbalances are being addressed with policy and cultural mindset change. And I believe that we've seen the changes happening and more countries will follow sooner rather than later. So creating a gender balanced publishing industry is surely an important step to addressing the imbalances in published content, but this is only part of the solution. girls around the world need to be able to access this content to benefit from it. And that's another challenge in many parts of the world. Book accessibility and the broader issue of keeping girls in school are pressing challenges, especially now during the pandemic. This is especially true in some regions in the world, such as sub-Saharan Africa. And to address some of these challenges, the IPA has been working closely with many African publishing associations through continuous engagement and support to work on initiatives like the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund, which was launched in 2019 in partnership with Dubai Cares. Through this fund, IPA supports innovations addressing many of the access and capacity challenges that we focused on in 2020 on remote learning and community-led innovations to keep students in school and provide under-resourced communities with the infrastructure they need to access books and cultivate livelihood skills. And here I'd just like to share an example of one of the winners of the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund. She's a young woman from Ghana, from northern Ghana, who set up an institution called Learners Girls Education, where she's taking girls into STEM education and keeping them in school and inspiring them with activities and projects so that they can be focusing on their education rather than dropping out of school. And so this is one of the projects that's come out of the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund. We've got plenty of other projects that are just as inspiring. And while publishers' contribution is important to continue putting girls in the front of books, we also need to create an ecosystem that's going to help us achieve this goal. And an ecosystem in which teachers, parents, community institutions, and governments can all work together to create the reader of the future, to facilitate access and distribution of books and educational material to both girls and boys. In closing, I just want to reiterate that the global publishing industry is really stepping up to the challenge of girls' literacy and books accessibility when possible. And I welcome more dialogue about this subject, and I'm looking forward to listening to all of the wonderful speakers that are joining us today to see how publishers can collaborate with everyone in the same space so that we can help create more opportunities for girls to read more books. Thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you every success with the rest of your discussions.
Bodour, thank you very much. Thank you for those wonderful insights and helping set the scene for the rest of our discussion today. So now we're shifting directly to the continent of Africa and hearing from two speakers who know well how to work with those who hold the purse strings, create the book policies, and determine publishing opportunities that impact the books that girls can read. So I'm delighted to welcome, first of all, Lily Nyariki, who is the Books and Learning Material Focal Point at ADEA, the Association for the Development of Education in Africa. Building on her special interest in developing and nurturing the habit of reading, especially among children, she has worked since 1997 with ADEA as the focal point for books and learning materials, bringing to bear more than 40 years of experience in the public sector, NGOs, and international organizations. Currently based in Eldoret, Kenya, Lily also consults with various institutions, including the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation, UNESCO, and UNICEF. Lily has published 2 books, Publishing and the Book Trade in Kenya, 1997, and Perspectives on Book Development in Africa, 2019. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in literature and 2 postgraduate diplomas in librarianship and mass communication from the University of Nairobi and the Leeds Metropolitan University in the UK. Lily, thank you for being here. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. And I just wanted to say that I want to share my story as a woman of Africa, a girl that was born in a rural setting way back in the 50s and went to school in the mid 60s. And why I'm sharing that story is that I remember so clearly during those days, our class teacher used to have a cupboard of books, full of books. And it used to be his pleasure and our pleasure to interact with those books so regularly. And one of the things that I remember is that whenever it was a weekend, that is a Friday, he would ensure that we borrow books and go home with them and bring them back on Monday, where we could tell stories about what we read from the books. Now, I'm saying this because that kind of a scenario has completely changed over the years. And I keep on wondering what went wrong. And more to that is that personally, I think what I am today is because of the books that I've been interacting with throughout my life, especially during those early days. And so I feel privileged to be asked to talk about ways in which our governments and Ministry of Education in particular can help in ensuring that more books reach girls, especially in rural areas. I also want to say that a week or so back, I was in some rural school in one part of Kenya where we took books, and you can imagine the school has hardly anything. And that kind of a scenario is replicated everywhere in Africa. And so, just as my predecessor said, this is a very timely topic that has come, and we are proud to be associated with it. And I would want to say that literacy is something that cannot be, taken lightly. And over the years, institutions like UNESCO have made it very clear that without literacy, countries cannot develop. It is even more critical for women, because we know women are the backbone of what goes on in the rural areas, for instance, and in most of the developing countries. Women are depended upon to take care of children and to ensure that the children go to school and things like that. So it is critically important that women are especially targeted for good education so that they're able to work better with their families and with their communities and of course with their nations. And so even as we talk about this important topic today, I want to say that in this world today, education is no longer about teaching students something about helping them to develop a reliable compass. I mean, rather, education is something that will help women in particular to provide them with a reliable compass and tools to navigate through this complex world that we live in. As you know, the COVID situation has even compounded the situation, and therefore it is critical that women are given a special focus and a special place in education. Now, quickly, as an ADEA focal point, I want to say that most of our work is focused on the book chain, strengthening the book chain. And of course, by the book chain, I think most of us know, we have to take care of all those who are involved in the book chain, beginning with authors, those who create books, those who produce books, that is publishers, those who distribute books, those who disseminate information, that is, those are the librarians, and of course, the readers themselves. And in addition, there's a group there that has always been so critical and yet not so well involved in these matters, that is governments through the ministries of education. And so we believe that we have to strengthen the book chain. And this is something that we've done over time, but unfortunately for Africa, the book chain is at its weakest in most countries. And this is something that we really must address if we are going to create what we call literate environments for our girls in particular, and of course boys, because we cannot really talk about girls and leave boys out. And so I wanted also to say that ministries of education must be involved, and how they must be involved is helping them understand the key role of the book chain in supporting education. I think for us, that is the biggest challenge. I know that ADEA works with ministries of education across Africa. Unfortunately, because this whole concept of the book chain has not been well understood, neither supported, we do need a situation where we can work with the ministries of education to ensure that they are brought into a position where when people in the book industry talk about the book chain, we are on the same page, as if we are understanding the same issues that need to be understood to make things work. One of the other things that ministries of education must also do is ensuring that girls have safe spaces within the school environment, within the school libraries. But unfortunately, in most of these schools, first of all, there are no such facilities like libraries, neither are there books, and more so books that speak to their own unique needs. So that is one area that ministries of education must endeavor to do, and to ensure that indeed girls get the focus that is required to help them move, navigate through lives that are already so complex because of so many of the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. Now, I wanted to quickly go on some initiatives that have been carried out by the Forum for African Women Educationalists, that is FAWE. And for your information, FAWE is like what you want to go say is a grown-up baby over there. It started off as a working group on gender, but of course it graduated into its own institution. And they, together with ministries of education, and of course we take pride in being associated with them as ADEA, they have tried to promote girls' education, and which we really are happy about, and hope that we will continue to be associated with them in order to ensure that this gender mainstreaming that our first speaker talked about is really understood, and everyone wanting to ensure that whatever is written is is appropriate for both girls and boys. And so one of the things that I wanted to zero in here is the fact that FAWE has had interventions of even providing books to schools, which is something that we really appreciate, and something that is what you might call a good practice, a model that can be copied by governments as well as development partners. And I think what is so encouraging with FAWE is that they have gone ahead and formed what they call Tuseme book club. I mean, they're clubs, actually, they're just called Tuseme clubs. These clubs, I think, will also offer a model for all of us who are moving forward in terms of finding ideas of how to bring books together with girls, because Tuseme is a Kiswahili word that means let us speak. And so with this kind of a framework that already is existing on the ground, we as ADEA and other development partners, that is all of us here really in this forum today, can begin to see how best to work with already established institutions like FAWE to work together to bring girls and books together in a real meaningful way, in a way to help them interact more with books, because we do know, as I didn't mention, but I'm a librarian by training, and as a librarian, we believe that books are powerful. Books have real power in terms of transformation and empowering anyone who cares to read. And so this is something so important, and we would want to work closely with everyone to ensure that our girls and books are brought together in a more practical way, and in a way that can be seen and is visible. And so I also want to quickly talk about the initiatives that we've had within ADEA. And my colleague and I, Alu, who are the focal points for books and learning materials within ADEA, have, like, for the past 3 or 4 years, not only collaborated with the Global Book Alliance in terms of meeting these very goals that we're talking about today, but more specifically, we've been involved in developing what we call a framework for national book and reading policies. This framework is available, and it is an instrument that can be used across Africa to help governments and anyone else really who is interested in understanding, why are books important? Why do we need to organize ourselves in a certain way in order to make books available for everybody? So that is the framework. But there's also another step that we took late last year, and we actually developed a toolkit. A toolkit, it is a set of documents that really guides governments, practitioners, and development partners on how to formulate and implement national book and reading policies. Basically, a national book and reading policy will be a document that has been agreed upon by all concerned, and which then will guide, like, almost step by step on how to organize the book industries in each member country. And so we think that is a very important document that we came up with, and hope that, in fact, we can pick it up as a group of people who are interested in book development in Africa, and ensure that we stop talking about it, because I think, in my view, we've talked about these things for far too long, and we do need to start moving on, in terms of ensuring that at least we have countries with book policies, and see how best they can address the book gaps and needs of the various readers or levels of readers. Now, quickly, before I conclude, I also wanted to go on to the challenges that have.
So just one more minute, please, Lily.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So I don't want to go into the challenges, because I think the challenges are so clear. But I wanted to say that we cannot really move on with girls' education if we do not take deliberate efforts. We have to take deliberate efforts by governments, by all involved, and we have to keep our resources also available to help girls be in touch with books. And in terms of recommendations, we want to build strong and sustainable book industries. Without them being sustainable, I don't think we can get very far. We need to scale up functional literacy, especially for girls, and girls, especially in rural areas. You realize that most girls, or rather most of those needs are in rural areas. And so also what I would like to say is that school libraries have to be given a focus in all our schools. And so these are my thoughts on how to get books to girls across Africa. And of course, we are available at any time to work with each one of you to ensure that this is done. Thank you very much.
Lily, thank you very much. You've raised a number of very important points, and it's so good to hear from the heart. And that's really the way I heard you speak, but also very positive to hear about the efforts, not only of ministries, but bodies such as FAWE and ADEA and the toolkit. So these are all critical aspects of taking action, as you say. It's time that we change the picture and made sure that these books are available. So thank you very much. Another colleague working alongside governments and communities and partners to ensure that books are written that support girls and women is Akoss Ofori-Mensah, the Managing Director of Sub-Saharan Publishers in Ghana. Akoss is a Ghanaian publisher who has served on the Ghana Book Publishers Association as the Honorary Secretary and Vice President. She was president from 2003 to 2005, and then started her own publishing house in 1993. Akoss has been a member of the African Publishers Network, the International Board on Books for Young People Executive Committee, and sits on the African Books Collective Council of Management. Her first job in publishing was at Afram Publishing and then at the Halco Group. Akoss holds a BA honors degree in English from the University of Ghana and a postgraduate diploma in English from the University of Nottingham in the UK. She was a teacher at Aburi Girls Secondary School and also interned at UNFPA in New York before studying for a master's in population education at the University of Chicago. Akoss, delighted to have you here, and we're excited to hear more from you about work in publishing in Ghana and the impact of your work on girls. Over to you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's a great pleasure to be in this august company, and I'm honored to share what I do with you. Now, the subject is on reading, girls, getting girls to read. Where there is no policy, whereas there is no policy discrimination against girls in education in any African country, they tend to be sidelined because of local negative cultural practices. Example, early marriage, and they are stuck with household chores whilst the boys are going to school, and they are sometimes sent to rich families in the cities to become house girls. In Ghana in recent times, girls from the northern part of the country have found a way dilemma. It's not a solution, but they think they've got a solution. They run down south to find freedom and work in the southern part of the country. And they become headquarters in the markets. What is being done to get girls into school? In Ghana, the Ministry of Education has set up certain incentives to help girls into school. For instance, the ministry provides free sanitary towels for young girls from poor homes. And the children are given one hot meal a day at school, free of charge. They also get free school uniforms. All this to help get girls, children and girls especially, into school. Now, the development of readers in Ghana, until post-independence times, most readers in Ghanaian schools were British classics like Enid Blyton, Snow White and Red Riding Hood, that kind of story. Then A4 Sutherland started to develop books, picture books for children. And the Children's Literature Foundation in Ghana also set up a prize for children's books, picture books. And Sub-Saharan publishers teamed up with a Canadian NGO known as the Osu Library Fund to develop stories for girls, in the northern part of the country. And these books, called the Fati books, were translated into northern Ghanaian languages, 3 northern Ghanaian languages, and sent to the north, for the children over there. They were supported by UNESCO and USAID. At this point, I would like to pay tribute to Viviana Quinones from Argentina, who used to work at the Central Library in Paris, and was also a member of La Joie par le Livre. This lady helped, she got the French Foreign Ministry to support the translation of Sosu's Call into French, and they bought copies for children in Francophone West Africa. Now, in the 1990s, things became very hard in Ghana. Teachers were running away to Nigeria, and the standard of education was going down, and both parents and the ministry became very worried. In fact, the government was so worried that they decided to take an amount of £8 million from a grant from DFID to buy readers for children in primary schools. It's the biggest book scheme we've had in Ghana, and we haven't had anything like that before till now. Now, these books were, they bought books from foreign publishers and also Ghanaian publishers, and they were put in boxes and sent to all the schools in Ghana so that the children could get access to books. Now, with the Ghanaian children getting these books from BSBS, we also had the situation where Code also intervened in the early 2000s, in Sierra Leone and Liberia. They set up projects called Reading Sierra Leone and Reading Liberia. And they were getting books from Ghana. In fact, they bought a lot of my books, for these two countries. This was because everything was destroyed during the brutal civil war that took place in those countries. And the book they liked most was the Jamila series, written and illustrated by Nikki Daly in South Africa and also published in South Africa by Tafelberg. Sub-Saharan publishers have bought the rights, and Code was buying our edition for Sierra Leone and Liberia. Now, for many children in Ghana, and for that matter, Black Africa, there are no reading books either in English or in local languages. South Africa is perhaps the only African country with lots of books for children in their 7 or so local languages. Most children do not have books to read at home, and the coming of the current pandemic has made matters worse. In this regard, the African Publishing Innovative Fund and its chairperson, Bodour Al-Qasimi, who is also the president of the International Publishers Association, must be highly commended for the great interventions she has provided for African children. The fund is supporting remote learning in African countries on phone, on computers, as well as in physical libraries. The APIF is supporting libraries in Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania, remote learning projects in Nigeria, girls' education projects in Ghana and South Africa with very generous grants. I wish to put it on record that projects that cater for the education of girls are very dear to Bodour's heart. Another great positive invention is the Code BERT Award for Young African Adult Literature. Now, the award was established in 2010, and the objectives of the award are as follows: to recognize excellence in young African adult fiction, to address the shortage of culturally relevant readers for young African adults, to strengthen English language skills of young adults in Africa, to stimulate and support the publishing industry in Africa, and to increase the stock of readers in English language in established school libraries and community libraries. Now, the achievements of the award, it ended in 2018. The achievements include the development of excellent culturally relevant stories for young African adults, the creation of a crop of young authors in the 4 countries in which the award operated, at least it did in Ghana, and the 4 countries were Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, and Ethiopia. It gave excellent business to African publishers. Winning titles went into 3rd or 4th printing. Sub-Saharan publishers published 2 of the first winning titles and sold not less than 25,000 copies each. In Ghana, most of the authors were young female professionals, a dentist, a medical laboratory operator, an academic, and a businesswoman, etc. And they addressed the problems of young adult female. The books are very popular and will be read for many years to come. In conclusion, literacy problems in Africa, especially girl child education, are being addressed thanks to the support of organizations like DFID, USAID, UNESCO, Code, APIF, and other donors to ministries of education in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Akoss. You and Sub-Saharan are truly trailblazers in this area, and we thank you for your work to ensure that the children of Ghana have those great books to read that support their future. So we're now going to open up the conversation towards the development sector and invite two practitioners to join the dialogue. They're both at the center of work in various countries to ensure access, availability, and focused support for girls and their literacy. We're hoping we'll get a little chat going and understand in more depth how their work is helping and what they and their teams are already doing to ensure that girls have access to books. So we're joined by Kerin, the Global Sector Lead for Education at World Vision International. Kerin has held this position since 2017, helping lead the shift in education programming across World Vision from a focus on access to a focus on learning outcomes. Prior to joining World Vision, Kerin worked with Australian Volunteers International, where she oversaw the placements of teacher trainers in Vietnam and Laos, including the management of summer vacation teacher training workshops. Kerin also worked for UNDP in Hanoi as the UNV and projects coordinator, and as a strategic planning officer for the Secretariat of the Pacific Community based in Fiji. Kerin holds a Master's of Social Science in International Development from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Melbourne. We're also grateful to be joined by Heather Simpson, the Chief Program Officer of Room to Read. Heather is responsible for the design, execution, and monitoring of Room to Read's literacy and girls' education gender equality programs in over 20 countries in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. She also leads the development and implementation of Room to Read's overall educational program strategy and oversees the global programs teams. She serves as a critical member of the executive leadership team, helping to set strategic direction for Room to Read's programs and growth. With over 25 years of experience, Heather has served as a manager and technical advisor for organizations such as the American Institutes for Research, WADA as an Associates, and Save the Children. She began her career as a Peace Corps volunteer based in Honduras. Heather earned her bachelor's degree from Yale University and her master's in education from the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia. Both Kerin and Heather will tell us a little more about their work with girls, books, and education before we open it up into a panel discussion. Kerin, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Scott. Just wanted to say how much Lily's story resonated with me. My own mother was born in rural Australia, one of 11 children during the Great Depression. And I remember her describing to me, daydreaming about there being a place where you could go and get an endless supply of books, that you could take them home for free. And that it was not until her early adulthood that she knew there was a place called a library where that was actually possible. And I just, don't we all really want to see a day when all children, regardless of the country, the context, the language, their ability, have access to that endless supply of books so that they can learn. So just to begin with a little bit of a background on World Vision, we are a Christian humanitarian and development agency with 100 offices around the world. And our mission is to improve the well-being of children with a focus on the most vulnerable. And increasingly that means children in contexts of violence and crisis. There are 5 priority sectors. Education is one of those, and we are usually the second largest in terms of investment after the health and nutrition sector. And we work across the life cycle of the child, so from infancy through to adolescence. Last year was a little bit odd, as we all know. So with school closures, we were still able to reach about 1.5 million children with remote educational support. 1 million education packs were provided in various countries, and still managed to coach 49,000 teachers in providing remote learning support. Next slide. So just, I'm not going to read all of that out, but this is our goal and our aspiration, I guess, is that all children require the skills and abilities that they need to live life in all its fullness. And we recognise education as foundational to that, foundational both in the short term to the individual child, the individual well-being of that child, but also to the broader commonwealth, I guess, of the entire community. And a quality education, particularly of girls, is a key development multiplier with benefits across the board in health, in income, empowerment, and environment, and social cohesion. Next slide. So just wanted to pick up a couple of things that we're looking to improve in our own programming over the next few years. One of them is reworking all of our approaches to education, our core project models, to incorporate universal design for learning principles. We want every child to have access to the opportunities provided through our programming, through our support to Ministry of Education programming. We want to pick up the non-formal aspects, particularly COVID, I think, has made that a little bit more urgent. Many of these things were already in our plans, but COVID really has given us a hurry up. And the last one is an increasing interest in technology, appropriate technology, and how that might help us bridge the global learning crisis. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kerin. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Kerin. So I really appreciate being part of this great discussion. Again, I'm Heather Simpson. I'm with Room to Read, and Room to Read believes that world change starts with educated children, and we envision a world in which all children can pursue a quality education that prepares them to be fulfilled and make positive change in their families, in their communities, and in the world. And we seek to transform the lives of millions of children living in poverty and in low-income communities by focusing on literacy and gender equality through education. Working in collaboration with local communities, partner organizations, and governments, we support primary school children to develop the literacy skills they need and a habit of reading that supports them to become lifelong learners. And we also support adolescent girls to complete secondary school with relevant life skills to succeed in school and beyond. And because our programs, we partner with ministries of education and partner with local organizations and local publishers and international publishers, our programs can be replicated, they can be localized and sustained to create system level reform. Room to Read's programs have benefited over the 20 years we've been in operation, or now it's more than 20 years. We've benefited 23.9 million children in 20 countries. And this is roughly about 10 million of those children are primary school girls benefiting from Room to Read's literacy programming, and 2.8 million adolescent girls in our girls' education programming that we do at lower secondary and upper secondary levels. Room to Read is also a book publisher. We deeply believe that children need access to relevant, engaging books in languages that they understand. And so we've published 1,840 original titles, and we've adapted titles to also publish 1,412 adapted titles, and this is in 43 different languages. We've distributed 32 million books, and we've also support libraries so that children can check out books, read them in school as well as outside of school, so they can have life-wide learning. And we've supported children to check out more than 242 million books checked out of libraries supported by Room to Read. We know that representation matters. We know that seeing yourself on the pages of a book can make positive difference. So girls need to see themselves in books. This helps with their own identity formation. It helps them feel included. We know that it helps inspire goals and inspire girls to develop their dreams and go after those dreams. And we know that being able to see yourself in books can help deepen learning. And books are critical to developing a lifelong learning habit. We need to make sure girls have representation in books. And this representation needs to reflect the rich diversity of girls in the world. And with that, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much, Heather. Okay, so we're now going to open it up into a bit more of a discussion. I'm going to give both Heather and Kerin 3 questions, which they'll have a chance to respond to. And then following that, we'll open it up, bring back all our panelists, and invite questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So let's firstly talk about the work in ensuring access to books, specifically on the programs that you may have implemented that have ensured access to high quality books for girls. Kerin, could we start with you with World Vision?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, one of the programs that World Vision supports is All Children Reading. It's a grand challenge for development. The other partners in that are USAID and the Australian government. And it operates through provision of prizes and grants to innovators to try and find innovative solutions to the barriers to children being able to read. So Alexa, who was the little girl in the last slide that I had, is from the Philippines, was born prematurely with retinopathy of prematurity, which means she's blind in both eyes, and she has cerebral palsy. And we, through All Children Reading, partnered with Resources for the Blind on a program called Reading Beyond Sight. And that project enabled the Department of Education to create 500 volumes of online accessible supplementary reading materials in Filipino, English, and 15 dialects. It supported teachers and schools and technical support to develop materials in accessible formats, so large print, braille, audio, to improve the reading environment in those schools with closed circuit televisions, magnifiers, braille embossers, daisy players. And that just increased the motivation, as Heather was saying, of children being able to access, seeing themselves represented in those books themselves. And a part of the All Children Reading program has also developed some quality standards and minimum standards for storybooks for the deaf using sign language that talk to the representation of deaf students and children within those books. So another sort of more pedestrian in a way, but another problem that we found in Nepal, the government's policy on school improvement required book corners in all grade 1 to 3 classes. But the problem was, despite there being a policy and a budget, there just weren't the books. They were not age-appropriate Nepali storybooks or publishers able to deliver those books to schools, particularly in remote areas. And we had a program called Knowledge Improved Through Access to Books. And through that program set up the Kitab Bazaar, which connected book publishers to schools to facilitate the purchase of buying bulk by district and providing incentives to those schools to set up the book corners. And so through both of those programs, just making sure books are available where they're needed most.
Thank you very much, Kerin. Heather, examples from from you.
Great, thank you so much. We know that a huge number of children around the world don't have any books at home. And so Room to Read has focused on supporting schools to develop libraries. I can imagine many of us on this call today have gone to schools and have seen a library in name only, where really it's a room with some locked cabinets with actually beautiful books inside that are locked away, books that are too precious to allow students to actually touch and use, and let alone take home. But we know that reading at home and reading with family members is a really powerful indicator for lifelong learning, for academic achievement in school. And so Room to Read focuses on developing those libraries, not only in name, but also in practice, and to help librarians and teachers understand that books are to be used, they're to be consumed. And that's why the supply chain needs to make sure that systems recognize that those books need to be replaced. I was in India a couple years ago before the pandemic, and whenever I travel to Room to Read supported schools, I love to visit the library and ask students to tell me where their favorite books are. And without fail, they will run to the far corners of the library and choose different books. Many of them are rounded edges, the pages are bent, but these are well-loved books. These are indicators that those books are actually being used, that they're actually being accessed. And so we focus on libraries as a method for accessing books. During the pandemic, many of those school libraries were closed. Children weren't able to access them. So we also have a digital platform. literacycloud.org is a way that we've digitized many of our book titles for those children who do have access to a computer or to a mobile device. They're able to access those books. We know, again, most of the children that Room to Read supports do not have access to a computer or a phone. And so we worked with partners to make sure that books were getting out to students' homes. We partner with post offices or food distribution groups to get books out to children. We need to look at those sorts of methods of distribution in the supply chain as well. And we've partnered with wonderful organizations. I know Bela, I saw her name earlier on this call. She's one of our partners in Pakistan. And they have worked with other organizations in Pakistan too, who are adapting books for sign language and sharing books via video through television broadcasts. Again, we need to find different appropriate technologies to get books out to children, even during this pandemic.
Thank you, thank you. So for my second question, the first was in regard to access. So this is more about use once they have access. Are there programs that you're pursuing that encourage active and frequent reading of more books? Heather, let me start with you on this one.
Thanks, Scott. I'll build a little bit more on our library work. So Room to Read supports first and second grade teachers for literacy pedagogy practices in their classrooms on instruction. And we want to make sure that during instruction period, there is a focus, an overt focus on literacy skills development, and decodable readers are really important books to use to help reinforce that literacy skills development. And then when I talk about our libraries, we're focused on supporting librarians as well as teachers in grades 1 through 5 or 1 through 6, depending on the primary school sort of configuration, to actually have regular library periods where they're engaged in read alouds, where they're helping girls and children of all genders find books that they love, that is at their level of reading, and make sure that those girls are checking books out and taking them home and making sure that they continue to check out more books. So those are some of the overt focuses on that we have. And I love to see these books that are that show these signs of love and use and wear. We do monitor checkout rates in schools, and because we want to make sure it's not just the boys who are accessing books, but that girls are also checking these books out and developing that habit of reading.
Excellent, thank you. Kerin, over to you.
Yeah, I think I heard books described as a form of technology in a workshop I was in where we were talking about education technology, and somebody said, well, books are actually a form of technology. And as we know from the research that's been done on the more sort of digital and high-tech technologies, technology on its own is often not successful. And so building that support around the piece of technology, be it a digital reader or a physical book, I think is really important and has been key in our programs to success that we may have seen, and where it doesn't happen, to the lack of success. So in Nepal, in the project I mentioned earlier, we worked with the teachers again to support them in using the book corners. So the books are there, the book corner is established, there's a process for borrowing books, but does the teacher know how to incorporate that within their classroom planning as part of a differentiated learning approach, for example? So really getting behind the teacher, and then getting behind the head teachers and district authorities in terms of monitoring that those things are happening as part of their monitoring of the quality of education in a particular school. In a project we have in Zimbabwe called iGate, it's a girls' education project, but during the pandemic, we found that the girls that were successful in terms of the lowest levels of learning loss through school closures were ones who'd been able to participate in what we were calling community learning centres. So I guess it's recognising that the education system is not a closed system. It's not just the school. Learning and education is happening in the classroom, but also outside the school walls. So providing that support to community-based groups or within families, so that book corners, learning corners can be set up in your own home, that parents and community volunteers are trained and supported to support their children's learning. Even parents who say, I can't help because I'm myself am illiterate. There are ways to just show that support and engender that spirit and joy in learning and in reading. And again, our follow-up showed a big difference, a statistical difference between girls who had access, in particular girls, access to those community learning centres and that support network in the home.
Excellent, thank you. So one more question to the two of you before we bring back the rest of the panel. So we've talked a little bit about access and use, but how do we ensure that the right books are being developed and published in the first place? Books that respond to the needs of the curriculum and to the individual learning needs of the girls. Can you talk a little bit about work that you might be doing in that area? And I'll start with you, Kerin, on this one.
Yeah, I think, so I mean, sometimes quite difficult, even within our own staff. We've had community book writing workshops, and just things that are ingrained to the point that you don't know it's ingrained, you don't know it's something that you're doing. It's quite difficult sometimes to overcome, for example, non-gendered representation of girls within the content of a book. But I guess one of the things we did in Nepal was to provide incentives to the book producers for producing age-appropriate, peer-reviewed storybooks. And setting up some standards around, representation of girls and representation of children with disabilities. And so then the school directors would choose those books online based on recommendations that had come from a panel of peers who had reviewed those books, and then were provided training on what was deemed to be age appropriate and representation appropriate, I guess. We also, focused on, one of the earlier speakers, it might have been Heather, said the importance of being represented. You need to see the mirror before you look out the window. So there was a prize under all children reading competition called EduApp for Syria, where a small group called Asafia produced STEM-related books, STEM-themed books that had girls and children with disabilities as the main protagonists. And that was, again, something that we could do as the donor of setting those standards for the prize. So I think it's those sorts of inspirations and incentives to be able to produce more until it becomes just the way we do things, that it doesn't become something we need extra training. I mean, I can't believe in the 2020s that we're still talking about appropriate gender representation, but here we are. So thank you.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Kerin. Heather, comments from you?
Great, thanks. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we do develop decodable readers that are mapped to the local literacy curriculum. So this helps students read words that have letters that they've started learning in their classrooms, and it helps reinforce that positive cycle of the more children, the more girls read, the better they will become as readers, and therefore that will serve them over their life. Room to Read as a publisher, we also develop and conduct book gap analyses to review what books are available in local markets, to look at what gaps exist in what's available, what's not available. And we're looking for books at different reading levels, different genre, different themes. We want to see genres such as realistic fiction, folklore and fantasy, narrative nonfiction, expository nonfiction as examples. We want a range of topics because we know girls and children of all genders have very diverse interests. So we want books that can tap those diverse interests and different types of characters. We want to show the diversity of humanness. We want girls who have different abilities, girls who have different ethnic backgrounds, different experiences. Those are really important to show up in books that they're reading. And this gap analysis helps inform our own publishing priorities. And so, for example, we knew that social emotional learning right now, it is really critical for children dealing with this global pandemic. So last year as a publisher, we developed a series of books that are leveled, that deal with topics that children are dealing with during this global pandemic that can support their social emotional well-being, and making sure that girls are represented in that is really critical for us. We work with local authors and illustrators, local publishers, local printers to produce books that fill a gap in that gap analysis. And we also work with partners with ministries of education to develop ideal book lists. And these ideal book lists can help inform their procurement requisitions and what books they're distributing out to schools as well, to make sure it's a wide range, that girls will find books that really tap into their interests and inspire them as readers. And one final thought on this, we know that there's a gap for books that are really focused on the needs of adolescent girls. And this is something that Room to Read historically has focused our publishing with early grade readers. We're starting to develop our plans for developing series of books for adolescent girls that touch on life skills that they need, touch on interests of those adolescent girls, again, to make sure that the gaps that exist in those markets are starting to be addressed as well.
Great. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Heather and Kerin. You've given us a lot to think about, truly informative and insightful comments. So thank you, and thank you for the work that you're both doing with your organizations. So we're going to open up the event now and open it up to the audience. We've been receiving a few questions, and would like to invite Bodour, Akoss, and Lily back into the conversation. So I think I'll just put this out to the group and see who would like to respond. So I've got a number to choose from. Here's one that's I find interesting. You know, literacy is really about both reading and writing, and it's not very often that we talk about the writing side of things. So the question is, how can we encourage girls to write their own stories? Who would like to take a shot at that? Akoss, I think you're muted though.
I think, you know, as the girl, as they read other books, they can also formulate their own stories. You know, if they want to create, you know, stories, or if they want to write their own books, they should read more and learn about other people's experience in writing books. The story, even from the story you read, it can inspire you to also create another story. So I think reading stories is very, very important if a person wants to be a writer and wants to write books that other people will also read. Yes.
So the two are inextricably linked in that regard. Anyone else like to make a comment on that?
We have, just speaking also about adolescence, we have a lot of youth clubs as part of our programming, and just that encouragement for girls to recognize that their story is worth something, that it's worth telling, that they have got something interesting, that what they're feeling and thinking matters. And I think we have a program that focuses on even just getting that started by, let's plot a timeline of the highs and lows that you've experienced, you know, asking those questions and probing, and then getting girls to start documenting that. Yeah, but I agree. It's reading, of course, it starts that too, because you do begin to see other people's experience. But yeah, again, that supportive environment to encourage and to, yeah, affirm, I guess.
Room to Read sees real power in mentorship and role models. And so a lot of the authors and illustrators we're working with are women, and it's important for us to have a range of authors and illustrators that show that is something that girls can continue developing their skills, and there's a future for them to become authors and illustrators of their own books as well.
Thank you. The entire webinar this morning has, this afternoon, depending where you are, but it's been, of course, about girls and women, and really wanting to make sure that we can even the playing field, so to speak, and ensure that girls and women have that access to great books and education. So the question that's come up is, how can we make sure we're also thinking about the boys and the men in this? Any specific comments on that side?
Room to Read wants to, one of our organizational commitments is to make sure our programming is not only gender sensitive, but gender transformative. And one of the things, we see books as a way that we can address some of the root causes of gender inequality. And gender inequality is not just a women's issue. It's not just a girl's issue. It is an all of us issue. It's all genders. And so we want to make sure those books that are gender transformative also appeal to boys, that they too benefit from a more gender equal world. And so that's one of our commitments that we want to continue to do even more in this space.
Thank you. Well, question from
I see
you.
Lily speaking.
Oh,
she was
Lily got her
muted.
hand up?
I was going to say that, in fact, we have to be very careful about this gender thing, because in Kenya, for instance, there's been a debate that, you know, there's been so much focus on girls and we leave boys out of the equation. So we do need to be very careful that when we are either writing stories, they bring these two groups together. There should be a deliberate effort to ensure that if there are solutions that are required in a problem that is facing girls, for instance, the boys should be also be part of that kind of a solution that is required, and they should be able then to contribute towards this. So I think it's a two-way thing in my view, and that even as we talk about girls, we cannot really afford not to bring in the perspective of boys as well, so that we bring in a more balanced kind of approach.
Thank you, Lily. The next question, it's actually from me, and I open it up to anyone on the panel, but I kind of would like to maybe hear from you first, Bodour. You know, I've been involved in these kinds of discussions for 30 years, and we're always talking about the importance of books, the importance of reading and learning materials. But it seems that every few years we have to have another discussion because the books simply don't exist. The publishing industries are not strong enough. How do we move from that sort of project by project approach to book supply to something more sustainable, more predictable, to ensure that children have books at early grade, and then as Heather was saying, you know, then they grow up and they should still be reading. We want adolescents to be reading. We want adults to be reading. So I'm curious if there are comments about that question of the sustainability of book supply. Bodour, do you have comments on that?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I think it's timely. I think it's important. I think that question will never go away. I think we're always going to be asking that question. I can put forward one solution. I know there are probably many ideas, but something I've learned from the pandemic really and how it's affected the publishing industry is that we are really stronger if we work together. And so solidarity is really important, especially now at this part of our history and how we look at the publishing industry. We are really dependent on every player in the value chain of publishing. So we need to have events such as this one, where we can all talk to each other, listen, learn from each other's experiences, and hopefully work together. In IPA, we're putting together a plan called the Industry Sustainability and Resilience Plan for Publishing, and it's called INSPIRE for short, where we're bringing together all of the players in the ecosystem of the publishing industry to work together on putting forward recommendations of how we can sustain our industry, how we can get through these difficult times, and make sure that books are vital and essential for our lives.
Thank you, Bodour. Akoss, could I ask you the same question? You're in the business of making books available. How do you think about the sustainability of supply?
Well, I think the writers should continue writing, and the publishers should also continue publishing. And we should dialogue with the educational institutions. Unfortunately, in Africa, I would say that over 50% of the books that are published are really textbooks, not reading books. And it's very important that children get access to books that they can just read and enjoy, not for any examination or any classroom work, but something to entertain them and make them lie in bed and laugh, or, you know, whatever, you know. And I think we need to get our people to write such, you know, stories or novels or plays, you know, that would excite the young people. It will excite them and it will make them read more and more instead of focusing on textbooks. Yeah.
That actually leads nicely into another question that I've received. You know, when we're talking about building the habit and the love of reading, for the most part, we're talking about trade books. We're talking about supplementary readers as opposed to textbooks. But the question being asked is that often education ministries are not convinced necessarily that their budget should go towards these supplementary readers, which perhaps they don't really see the full value in them, even thinking of them as fluff, as the questioner says. But we also know that these are the materials which actually build the habit and love of reading. I don't think any child ever learned the love of reading from a textbook. But what can we do to help ministries truly understand the value of these kinds of supplementary, complementary materials? Who would like to jump on that one?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
So Room to Read sees the power of sharing evidence and helping show that the work we're doing, not only in the classroom to improve instruction, but also in the libraries and making sure children have access to books at home, showing the evidence that those things combined help ministries of education reach their goals. All ministries of education around the world want their children to learn, want their students to develop the skills. And by developing some of this evidence that these books are a critical sort of support to that goal, really has helped move the dial and move the conversation. In places like Cambodia, where we've been working for a number of years now, the Ministry of Education has seen the power of libraries and the power of these types of books that you're talking about. And now they're starting to develop their library standards. They're going to roll out national libraries around all of their schools. And this is because we've been able to develop the evidence and the trust, and they see the joy in those classrooms when students do have access to these types of books.
Thank you.
Can I jump
Bodour.
in? Yeah, I just want to share an example of the work we're doing at the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund. And I'm so happy to have Akoss joining me here today. Akoss is one of our committee members at the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund. And we noticed the same issue, Scott, that you're raising, and the importance of having, literature just for reading pleasure, and how that builds character and imagination in young people. And this year's themes that we announced on beginning of June for the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund is creating a culture of reading beyond the classroom, where we're hoping to encourage as many people as possible to apply for the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund with projects that nurture this type of literature for pleasure. And more details can be found on the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund website for all of the viewers who are listening in today. And I can put that in the chat as well so people can access that. So I think it's definitely important. It builds character and really helps pave the way for a more robust future for children.
Excellent, thank you. And yes, we absolutely advocate that people take a look at that resource on the website. I think we have time for perhaps one more question, and I'd like to build a bit more on that last question. I mean, at the end of the day, books are a recurring cost. They ultimately, depending on the quality of their production, they can last longer, but we know that books that are well read and are going to get used up, so to speak. So we need ministries of education, we need governments to set aside budget on a recurring basis to replace these books, to replace books in libraries and in schools. Any points on how we can help convince ministries to build those kinds of recurring costs and recurring budget into their annual budget to make sure that the books can be purchased and get into and keep getting into libraries?
I will go back to data. It's really helpful to show the data that when children do have access to these types of books, their learning improves. It's important for teachers to share that their jobs are much easier and much more effective when they have access to these types of reading materials as well. And those are really powerful data and the voices of teachers to influence ministries of education. We've also worked with local publishers in a place like South Africa, where we worked with developing their business plans so that they could see the power of doing local language publishing, which could address the needs of ministries of education, and ministries of education could do pooled procurement requests, again, to try to strengthen some of the supply chains and strengthen those supports so that ministries of education could get access to more economic ways to get better books into their schools as well. So I think it takes all of us working together.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Heather. So we're just about wrapping up here. We're just about at the end of our time. Any one of our panelists have a final word they want to say? Don't feel you have to, but I don't want to cut you off either. Any final points? Okay, that's great. So I'm gonna wrap up our webinar here. So please, thanks to all our panelists for the time that you've given us. And thank you to the audience for spending this time with us. We'd love you to find out more about the various partners that have spoken today, but also about the Global Book Alliance. So you can find out news on all of that and get our newsletter at globalbookalliance.org. So take a look at that. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, Bodour, Akoss, Lily, Heather, and Kerin. Thank you for participating in what is an extremely important conversation for all the work that we do every day to end illiteracy, to increase access to education, and to ensure more books and better books get into the hands of girls and boys around the world. So we're hoping that you'll join us for our next conversation, and you can find information on that on our newsletter and website. Stay tuned, stay well, and keep reading. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.